He lay where the river had overreached itself, the bank softened and pulled apart by days of rain. Water pressed close to his side, sliding past in a steady, impatient flow that carried branches and torn leaves with it. His mane was dark and heavy, clumped together by moisture, dragging at his neck and shoulders. From a distance, his body blended into the wet earth, so still that it seemed shaped by the river rather than placed beside it. It was the tail that gave him away. Not movement exactly, but the faintest tension held there, a subtle stiffness that did not belong to something lifeless. When the current surged a little higher and brushed against his hind leg, the tail twitched once, slow and incomplete, as though the signal had to travel too far to fully arrive. The lion's chest rose, then hesitated, then fell again, each breath shallow and uneven, barely disturbing the damp fur along his ribs. Those watching from higher ground did not rush. Experience had taught them that moments like this revealed themselves in fragments, not all at once. The river was louder than usual, swollen with runoff from distant storms, its surface broken and restless. The smell of wet soil and vegetation hung thick in the air. The lion's head rested low, chin near the mud, his mouth slightly open as if breathing through effort rather than choice. His ears lay flattened not in warning, but in surrender to the weight of waterlogged fur. One foreleg was bent awkwardly beneath him, the paw half submerged, claws dulled by silt. When the river surged again, pushing closer, his flank tightened in response, a reflex more than a decision. He did not lift his head. He did not attempt to move away. Concern gathered quietly. There were no dramatic signs of struggle, no thrashing or roar to mark the danger. Instead, the threat crept forward inch by inch, carried by the steady rise of water and the lion's diminishing margin for strength. His breathing remained the clearest indicator. It came in short pulls, unevenly spaced, each one sounding as though it had to be chosen. The current tugged at the ground beneath him, loosening small clumps of earth that broke away and disappeared downstream. His body shifted slightly as the bank softened, not enough to change position, just enough to suggest how little stability remained. The lion's eyes opened briefly, unfocused, reflecting light off the river's surface without fixing on it. They closed again almost immediately. A figure stepped closer along the bank, careful to keep above the waterline. The sound of boots against wet ground did not draw a reaction. Only when a shadow crossed the lion's shoulder did his ear flick weakly, then settle back into place. His breathing paused for a moment that stretched uncomfortably long, then resumed, thinner than before. "He's still with us," someone said quietly, the words offered more as confirmation than reassurance. The lion's body seemed to gather itself then, not into motion but into awareness. His chest rose a little higher with the next breath. His tail shifted again, a faint response to the changing pressure of water against his leg. It was enough to confirm that life remained, but not enough to suggest control. The river pressed closer, its edge now brushing his belly. Cold water soaked deeper into his coat, darkening it further, adding weight where none could be spared. The lion's head lifted a fraction, just enough to pull his muzzle clear of the damp earth. The movement cost him. His neck trembled briefly before settling again, his chin hovering just above the mud. Those watching remained still, reading the moment as it unfolded. This was not a crisis announced all at once. It was a quiet narrowing revealed through breath and muscle and the relentless patience of water. The river continued its advance, indifferent and steady, while the lion lay at its edge, holding on through small, almost invisible signs that said he was not finished yet. The river did not rush him all at once. It worked patiently, sliding higher along his side, loosening the ground beneath his weight until solid earth was no longer something he could rely on. Each small surge pulled at him, not hard enough to take him, but enough to shift him farther from where his strength might have mattered. Mud gave way beneath his ribs, and his body followed by inches, settling again only because there was nowhere else to go. The lion did not resist. His eyes were half open now, the whites faintly visible as his gaze drifted without fixing on anything in particular. The muscles along his shoulders tightened and released without producing movement, signals sent too late or received too weakly to translate into action. Water lapped against his belly, soaking deeper into his coat, drawing heat away in a slow, deliberate exchange. Those watching could see it clearly now. This was not a body preparing itself. It was a body failing to respond. The lion's breathing had grown irregular again, shallow pulls broken by pauses that stretched longer than comfort allowed. His mouth opened slightly with each breath, drawing in air that seemed heavier here, damp and cold. When the current pressed harder, nudging his flank, his tail lifted weakly, then dropped back into the water. There was no aggression in him. No warning in the angle of his head or the set of his jaw. His ears remained low, flattened by the weight of wet fur rather than tension. The river carried sound and movement around him, but he existed slightly apart from it now, suspended in a state where effort no longer promised results. One person stepped forward from the higher bank. There was no announcement, no sudden urgency. The decision was shaped by what was missing rather than what was present. Stillness had settled into the lion in a way that did not belong to rest. It was the stillness of a body that had reached the edge of its options. The human moved slowly, testing each step before committing weight. Water swallowed the lower legs, cold and insistent. The lion's eyes shifted at the change, lifting just enough to register movement. They did not sharpen. They followed briefly, then drifted again as though focus itself required too much effort. Closer now, the human could see the tremor running through the lion's chest with each breath. It was subtle, almost hidden beneath the soaked mane, but it was there, a quiet vibration that marked how close he was to slipping away from control entirely. The river tugged again, stronger this time, and the lion's body slid another fraction, his hindquarters dipping lower as the bank collapsed beneath him. A hand reached out, stopping short, hovering in the narrow space between water and fur. The lion did not pull back. His breathing hitched, then resumed, thinner but still present. His eyes closed briefly, then opened again, the lids heavy as though even that small motion had to be negotiated. "I've got you," the human said quietly, not to promise rescue but to mark presence. The words did not change the lion's condition, but something in his body shifted. His head lifted a little higher, just enough to clear the water pressing toward his muzzle. The movement was unsteady, his neck muscles trembling before settling again. It was not strength returning. It was permission being given. The river continued to rise, indifferent and steady. Around them, branches and debris swept past, brushing against legs and drifting on. The humans stayed where they were, responding not with force or urgency, but with careful proximity. This was not a moment for heroism. It was a response to quiet, to exhaustion written so clearly in a body that no longer resisted being carried away. As the water closed in, the lion remained there, eyes half open, breath shallow but ongoing. The space between him and solid ground had narrowed to almost nothing, measured now not in distance but in time. And in that narrowing, one human stood close, not to command the moment, but to answer the stillness that should never have been there at all. The first contact was almost imperceptible, marked not by movement from the lion, but by the way his breathing shifted in response. Hands met fur that was heavy with water, cold pressed deep into the mane and skin beneath it. The lion did not flinch. His body offered no tension, no warning. It yielded weight and warmth and the quiet effort of staying present. The river pressed on, indifferent to the change unfolding within it. Water pulled at legs and clothing, tugged at balance, slid past in restless sheets that reflected the dimming sky. The lion's body felt larger here, not because of strength, but because exhaustion had made him dense, uncooperative. Each attempt to move him revealed how little he was holding himself together. His muscles responded slowly, if at all, answering touch with delay rather than resistance. Those helping did not rush. They adjusted their footing, tested leverage, learned his weight in fragments. The lion's chest continued its shallow rise and fall, breath arriving unevenly but reliably, as if he were counting each one. His head rested low, muzzle just clear of the water, whiskers dripping steadily. When the current surged, his body shifted with it, sliding slightly before being steadied again by careful hands. No sound came from him beyond breath. No growl. No warning. His ears lay flat beneath the soaked mane, not pinned back in fear, but flattened by the simple burden of water. His eyes opened once, briefly, unfocused and dim, then closed again as if light itself had become too much to process. The shared silence felt fragile, stretched thin by the river's noise and the weight of what might go wrong. Every movement risked startling him, risking the sudden return of instinct that could shatter the narrow trust holding the moment together. Hands moved slowly, always announcing themselves through pressure rather than surprise. When his body was guided, it was done with pauses, allowing him time to accept each change. The lion's breathing faltered once, a pause that lasted too long, tightening the air around everyone involved. Then it resumed, shallow but steady, and the moment eased just enough to continue. His body sagged against the support offered, not collapsing but no longer resisting gravity. He was enduring rather than participating, lending nothing but breath to the effort. Water rose to the chest now, cold pressing against ribs already taxed by exhaustion. The lion's head was lifted gently, supported without forcing it upright. His neck trembled under the effort, then settled. The movement seemed to drain him further, leaving his body heavy and still again, but it kept his muzzle clear, kept breath possible. Something delicate took shape there, not named, not acknowledged aloud. It existed only in the way hands adjusted instinctively to his movements, in the way no one tightened their grip more than necessary. Trust here was not confidence. It was restraint, mutual and uncertain, held together by the shared understanding that fear, if awakened, could undo everything. The crossing was not swift. Each step was negotiated against water and weight, against the unpredictability of a body that might suddenly remember how to fight or might simply stop responding altogether. The lion remained quiet throughout, his endurance measured only in breath and the faint, involuntary shifts of muscle when balance changed. The river continued its work around them, carrying debris past, tugging at legs, reminding everyone how easily it could take more. The lion's body was guided forward inch by inch, his survival balanced delicately between what he could still give and what others could hold for him. In that uncertain space, nothing was guaranteed. Not strength. Not safety. Only the shared silence, the steady hands, and the fragile agreement between fear and trust that, for now, neither would be allowed to break. The ground changed beneath him before his body understood it. The pull of the river loosened, replaced by the firmer resistance of earth that held rather than yielded. Hands remained at his side for a moment longer, adjusting to the absence of current, allowing his weight to settle fully onto land. Water drained from his mane in steady streams, darkening the soil beneath him. His chest rose and fell again, deeper this time, the breath no longer shaped by panic or cold alone. For a long moment he did not move. His body lay heavy against the ground, muscles slack, limbs placed where they had landed. Those around him stayed still, resisting the instinct to retreat too quickly or crowd too close. This pause felt necessary, as though something unfinished still hung between them. Then, slowly, the lion began to gather himself. It started with his forepaws, claws pressing faintly into the dirt as sensation returned. His shoulders tightened, not sharply but with purpose, drawing strength from somewhere that had not yet been visible. His head lifted, unsteady at first, water spilling from his mane as his neck trembled under the effort. He held it there, breathing through the strain, eyes half open but present now, focused in a way they had not been before. The people around him did not move. They did not speak. The moment asked for stillness and they answered. With another breath, deeper than any before it, the lion pushed himself upright. His hindquarters followed, slower, the movement uneven but determined. When he stood, his legs shook briefly, a visible reminder of how close he had come to failing. Then the trembling eased. His weight settled evenly across all four limbs. He did not flee. Instead, he remained where he was, water dripping from his body, chest expanding and contracting with steady rhythm. His ears lifted slightly, no longer pressed down by water or fatigue. His tail hung loose behind him, motionless. He turned his head just enough to take in the shapes around him, the humans who had held his weight, guided his breath, and then let go. There was no challenge in his gaze. No urgency to reclaim distance. What passed between them was quieter than fear and heavier than relief. It was recognition without claim, acknowledgement without demand. The lion took one step forward, then stopped. The ground held. He lowered his head slightly, not in submission but in balance, as if aligning himself with the world again after being pulled so close to leaving it. His breathing slowed further, each rise of his chest full and deliberate. No one moved to follow when he turned away. He walked a few paces, then paused once more, standing with his back to them, his silhouette broad and unmistakable against the dimming light. Wind moved through his wet mane, lifting it gently before letting it fall again. Then he continued on. His steps were measured, no longer uncertain, carrying him away from the river's edge and into higher ground where grass brushed against his legs. With each step, the distance grew, and with it, the sense that something rare had passed through the space they shared. Those who remained watched until his form broke apart into shadow and vegetation, until movement became suggestion and then nothing at all. The river continued behind them, loud and restless, but the land around them felt changed, held in a quieter tension. When the lion was gone, the stillness lingered. It did not belong to safety alone. It belonged to the pause he had given them, to the strength he had gathered when none was expected, and to the unspoken exchange that remained, long after the moment itself had moved on. He moved away from the river in stages, not with urgency, but with care, as though reacquainting himself with the weight and function of his own body. Each step tested ground and muscle together. His paws pressed into damp soil, then lifted again, steadier than before. The weakness that had hollowed him out at the water's edge did not vanish, but it no longer defined him. Strength returned quietly, borrowed breath by breath, motion by motion. The farther he went, the less he paused. His shoulders rolled more freely beneath his mane, now lightened by wind and distance from the cold pull of the current. His head stayed level, no longer dipping with fatigue. When the ground sloped upward, he adjusted without hesitation, balance re-established through instinct rather than effort. The river's sound faded behind him, replaced by the softer textures of land, grass bending, insects lifting, wind moving low and steady. He did not look back again. What had passed at the water's edge did not ask for acknowledgement. It had already settled where it belonged, folded into the larger pattern of survival and passage that shaped his life. Ahead of him, the land opened into familiar terrain, marked by scent and memory rather than danger. Behind him, the humans remained still until his form broke fully into the landscape. Then one by one they stepped back. There was no discussion, no relief spoken aloud. Boots retreated from the softened bank, leaving shallow impressions that the river would soon erase. Hands that had carried weight and guided breath lowered and emptied themselves of the task. The shoreline returned to itself quickly. Water slid back into the places where bodies had stood. Mud smooth. Grass leaned, then rose again. The place where the lion had lain held no marker, no sign of the moment that had unfolded there. Only the river remained, moving on with the same indifferent patience it always had. Yet something lingered. It was not visible. It did not alter the flow or quiet the current. It existed instead in the way the space felt empty but not erased, as though memory had briefly pressed into the land and then stepped away. The humans felt it as they left, carrying no proof, only the weight of having been present when something fragile had held together. Farther upstream, the river narrowed and quickened, its surface broken by rocks and shadow. Downstream it widened again, slow and heavy. It would carry branches, silt, and leaves long after the footprints were gone. It would not remember. The lion did. Not as gratitude, not as attachment, but as a moment when the world had shifted just enough to allow him through. As he moved deeper into the wild, his pace evened out, his breathing settled fully into its natural rhythm. The river became just another sound behind him, then no sound at all. By the time dusk began to soften the edges of the land, the shoreline was empty again. Wind passed through the reeds. Water slid along its banks. Nothing remained to suggest that trust had once balanced there against fear and exhaustion. Except in memory. And memory, unlike the river, does not rush. It stays where it forms, carried forward quietly, step by step, until it becomes part of the ground one walks on without needing to be seen again.